My children, gather close. Let me tell you about Kwame, a carpenter whose hands could turn rough timber into beauty, but whose heart nearly missed the greatest treasure of his life. In the bustling heart of Accra, where the morning sun painted the corrugated roofs gold, and the sound of sawing wood, mixed with car horns and street vendors' calls, Kwame owned a small carpentry shop wedged between a tailor's stall and a provision store. His fingers were calloused, his clothes often dusted with sawdust, but his craftsmanship was known throughout 3 neighborhoods. Every morning at 6, he would unlock his shop, and every morning at 6:15, a woman would walk past on her way to work at the accounting firm 2 streets over. Her name was Amma. She wore simple dresses, not the cheap ones from the market. But not the expensive ones from the boutiques either. Just simple. Her handbag was plain leather, brown and practical. Her shoes were clean but worn at the heels. And her smile, when she glanced at Kwame through his shop window, could make him forget which end of the hammer to hold. For 3 months, Kwame only watched her pass. On the 4th month, he gathered courage like a man preparing to lift a heavy load, and stepped outside his shop just as she approached. "Good morning," he said, his voice catching slightly. I've been meaning to ask. That watch you wear, the strap is coming loose. I noticed it last week. I could fix it for you. I work with leather sometimes, for furniture, but I can repair small things too." Amma looked down at her watch, a simple timepiece with a fraying strap, and then back at Kwame. Her eyes studied him carefully, as if she were reading a book whose ending she needed to know before beginning. "And how much would you charge for this repair?" she asked. "Nothing," Kwame said quickly, then felt foolish. "I mean, it would be a small job. Consider it a neighborly gesture." A smile played at the corner of her lips. "I don't believe in free things, Mr. Carpenter. Everything has a cost. But perhaps we could negotiate. You fix my watch strap, and I'll bring you lunch one day next week. Fair trade?" Kwame's heart hammered against his ribs like he was the one being carved. Very fair. That was how it began. The lunch Amma brought was simple: jollof rice with chicken, packed in a plain plastic container. They ate together on the bench outside his shop, watching the city rush past them like a river around 2 stones. "You know," Amma said, picking at her rice, "everyone keeps telling me I should find a man with prospects. A banker, maybe, or a businessman with a car and a house in East Legon." Kwame's chest tightened. "And what do you tell them?" "I tell them that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account," she said, looking directly at him. "I tell them I'll know the right man when I find him. Someone real. Someone who sees me, not what I might bring him." "And have you?" Kwame asked quietly. "Found him?" Amma smiled. "I'm still looking." But the way she said it, and the way her hand brushed against his as she stood to leave, told Kwame that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't looking very far. Their courtship was gentle and slow, like watching wood cure in the sun. They would meet for lunch, then for evening walks along the busy streets of Accra, weaving between hawkers and taxis. Amma would visit his shop and watch him work, asking questions about joints and grains and techniques. "Why do you love it?" she asked one evening, running her hand along a chair he was building. "The carpentry?" Kwame paused, his plane hovering over the wood. "Because wood remembers what it was, a living tree, and if you work with that memory instead of against it, you can make something that lasts, something true." Amma was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she finally said, "something true." It was 6 months before Kwame met Amma's family, and when he did, It was strange. She brought him to a small rented flat in a modest neighborhood where her aunt, who she said raised her, lived with 2 young children. The aunt was kind, but watched Kwame with sharp eyes, as if testing him somehow. "Where are your parents?" Kwame asked Amma later, as they walked home through the evening streets. "My mother died when I was young," Amma said, which was true. "My father, we're estranged. He wanted me to live a certain kind of life, and I wanted to live my own. So I left, and I've been making my own way since." This, too, was true, though not in the way Kwame understood it. "I'm sorry," Kwame said, taking her hand, "but I'm glad you chose your own path. It led you to me." Amma squeezed his hand, and in the fading light, he didn't see the tears that gathered in her eyes. Kwame's friends and relatives had opinions, and they shared them freely. "Brother," his cousin Emmanuel said one evening, drinking beer outside the shop after closing time, "this woman you're seeing, Amma, what does her family do? What's her background?" "Why does it matter?" Kwame asked, already knowing where this was going. "Because, my brother, you need to think practically. You're a good carpenter, yes, but you're not rich. You should marry a woman with connections, a woman whose family can help you expand this business. Maybe her father owns land, or her uncle works in government. These things matter." Kwame set down his bottle harder than he meant to. "What matters is that I love her, that she's kind and smart and makes me want to be better. That when I'm with her, I feel like I'm finally building something that will last." Emmanuel shook his head. "Love and 5 cedis will buy you a loaf of bread, brother. But it won't grow your business or secure your future." These conversations happened again and again. His aunt pulled him aside at church. His old schoolmate cornered him at the market. Even his own mother, with gentle worry in her voice, suggested that perhaps he should think more carefully about his choice. "I'm not saying don't marry for love," his mother said, sitting in his small rented room one Sunday afternoon. "But Kwame, my son, love is sweeter when there's bread on the table. This girl, she works as a clerk, yes? She lives simply, like you. Wouldn't it be wiser to find someone whose family could help lift you both up?" "Mama," Kwame said firmly, "I don't want to be lifted up by someone else's family. I want to build my own life, with my own hands, with a woman who chose me for who I am, not what I could take from her family." His mother sighed but said no more. Kwame proposed on a Friday evening in his shop after he'd closed for the day. There was no expensive ring, just a simple band he'd saved 3 months to buy. He got down on one knee, surrounded by the smell of wood shavings and varnish, and asked Amma to be his wife. She said yes immediately, then pulled him to his feet and held him so tightly he could feel her heart beating against his chest. "Are you sure?" she whispered into his shoulder. "I'm not. I can't give you advantages. No connections, no family wealth to fall back on. Just me." "Just you," Kwame said, "is everything I want." She pulled back to look at him, and he saw something fierce and bright in her eyes, something like relief, or gratitude, or love so deep it had no name. "Then yes," she said again. "Yes, yes, yes." They married 3 months later in a small ceremony. Amma's aunt attended, along with a few people Kwame assumed were distant family members or friends from work. His own family came, though he could see the disappointment lingering in their faces, the silent judgment that he was marrying beneath his prospects. It didn't matter. When Amma walked toward him in a simple white dress, when she took his hands and spoke her vows, Kwame knew he was the richest man in Accra. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Kaneshi, nothing fancy but clean, and theirs. Amma continued working at the accounting firm. Kwame continued building furniture. They were happy in the way of people who have chosen each other deliberately, whose love is built on the solid foundation of seeing and being seen. 5 years passed like water flowing, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough, but always moving forward together. Kwame's business grew slowly but steadily. He hired an apprentice, then another. He moved to a slightly larger shop. It was honest work, hard work, but good work. Amma was promoted to senior accountant at her firm. She would come home with stories about difficult clients and complicated ledgers, and Kwame would tell her about custom orders and difficult wood grains, and they would laugh together over their simple dinners. His family had mostly accepted the marriage by then, though occasionally his cousin Emmanuel would still shake his head and say, "Brother, if only you'd married that banker's daughter who used to eye you, you could have had a car by now." And Kwame would smile and say nothing, because how could he explain that he had something more valuable than a car? He had a partner who knew him, truly knew him, and loved him anyway. The revelation came on a Tuesday. Amma had been quiet for days, distant in a way that worried Kwame. He'd asked if something was wrong, if he'd done something to upset her, but she'd only shaken her head and said she was thinking. That Tuesday evening, she sat him down at their small dining table after dinner. Her hands were trembling slightly, and for a terrifying moment, Kwame thought she was going to tell him she was leaving. "There's something I need to tell you," Amma began, and Kwame's heart dropped into his stomach. "Something I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid. And the longer I waited, the more afraid I became, until now I'm terrified that when I tell you, you'll hate me for the lie." "I could never hate you," Kwame said, reaching for her hands, but she pulled them back. "Wait, let me finish. Please." She took a deep breath. "Do you remember when we first met, and I told you my father and I were estranged?" Kwame nodded. "That was true. But I didn't tell you who my father is. I didn't tell you because I needed, to know if someone could love me for myself. Not for my father's name or his wealth or his connections, just for me. Kwame, my father is Nana Ose." The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Nana Ose, owner of Ose Enterprises, one of the largest construction and real estate companies in Ghana. The man whose face appeared in business magazines and newspapers. The man whose family compound in East Legon took up an entire block. Kwame sat back slowly, his mind trying to reorganize everything he thought he knew. He started, then stopped. "Your father is Nana Ose?" "Yes." "The Nana Ose?" "Yes." A long silence stretched between them. Amma's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her hands clenched together on the table. "Why?" Kwame finally asked. "Why hide it?" And here Amma's voice cracked. "Because every man who ever approached me before you wanted something. They saw me, and they saw my father's business, his connections, his money. They saw a stepping stone to wealth and power. They would say they loved me, but I could see in their eyes they were calculating what I could do for them." She wiped at her eyes roughly. "I left my father's house when I was 23. I told him I wanted to make my own way, and he was furious. But I couldn't stand it anymore. The fake smiles, the calculated romance, never knowing if anyone saw me or just saw what I could give them. So I took only what I'd earned from a small job he'd given me years before. I rented that flat with my aunt, who works for my father but agreed to help me, and I got a real job on my own merit." "The accounting firm," Kwame said quietly. "Yes, a real job, where no one knew who my father was, where I could just be Amma, a woman trying to make her way in the world. And then I met you." She finally looked up at him, and her face was a landscape of fear and hope. "You looked at me like I was precious, not useful, not advantageous, precious. And when you asked me out, you were nervous and sweet and genuine. You didn't ask about my family or what I could do for you. You just wanted me." "I did," Kwame said. "I do. But don't you see?" Amma's voice rose slightly. "I lied to you. By omission, but still a lie. And then when we got serious, I kept lying because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, everything would change. You'd see me differently. Or worse, you'd stay with me because of what my family could offer you. And I'd never know if you loved me or just what I could give you." She stood abruptly, pacing their small living room. "And then, everyone, your family, your friends, they all kept telling you to find someone with wealth and connections. And you refused. Again and again, you chose me over their advice. You chose me when you thought I had nothing to offer but myself. And every time you did, I wanted to tell you the truth. But I also needed to know you'd keep choosing me even without knowing." She turned back to him, tears now flowing freely. 5 years, Kwame. I let you struggle to build your business when one word to my father could have changed everything. I watched your family judge you for marrying down when I could have shown them you'd married up in the way they measured. I lied to you for 5 years because I was selfish and afraid, and now I don't know if you can forgive me." Kwame sat in silence, absorbing her words. Part of him wanted to be angry. She'd lied, deceived him, let him face judgment and criticism when she could have prevented it. But another part, the deeper part, where his love for her lived, understood. Finally, he spoke. "Come here. Kwame, please, come here." Hesitantly, Amma moved back to the table and sat down. Kwame took her hands, and this time she let him. 5 years ago, he said slowly, I married a woman I loved. A woman who was kind and smart and real. Today, I'm still married to that same woman. Nothing about you has changed. But everything has changed, Amma protested. No, Kwame said firmly. Your circumstances were different than I thought. Your family background was different than I thought. But you, the woman who brings me lunch and asks about wood grain and laughs at my terrible jokes, the woman who holds my hand during movies and argues with me about whether jollof or wakie is better, that woman hasn't changed at all. But I lied. You protected yourself, Kwame corrected gently. You protected your heart from people who would use you. Was it the best way? Maybe not. Did it hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth sooner? Yes, a little. But Amma, I understand why you did it. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them softly. Do you know what I'm grateful for? I'm grateful that I never knew. Because your family was right, I should have married someone from wealth and connections. And I did. But I didn't know it, which means every choice I made, every time I defended you to my family, every time I chose you over their advice, I did it purely because I loved you, not because I was smart enough to see a good opportunity, not because I was calculating my future prospects, just because you were you. Fresh tears spilled down Amma's cheeks, but now they seemed different somehow. Lighter. I chose you when I thought you had nothing to give me but yourself, Kwame continued, which means I chose you for exactly the right reasons. And now, knowing the truth, I'd choose you again. I'd choose you 1,000 times, with money or without, with your father's approval or without, with my family's blessing or without. I'd always choose you." Amma made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "You're not angry?" "Maybe a little," Kwame admitted, "but mostly I'm relieved." "Relieved?" "Yes, because now I know for certain that what we have is real. We built it on honest ground. Well, mostly honest ground," he added with a small smile. "We built it on who we actually are, not on what we could get from each other. That's rare, Amma. That's precious." She came around the table and climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck and burying her face in his shoulder. He held her tightly, feeling the tension drain from her body. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much. I love you too, all of you, including the complicated family situation I apparently married into." She pulled back with a watery laugh. "About that, my father wants to meet you. Actually, he's wanted to meet you for years, but I kept making excuses. He knows about you. I couldn't completely cut him out, and he has ways of finding out things. But he agreed to stay away until I was ready." "And are you ready now?" Amma nodded. "If you are." Kwame took a deep breath. "Will he hate me? For being a carpenter? For not being rich?" "No," Amma said with certainty. "He'll respect you, because you're the only man who ever loved his daughter without wanting something from him. You're the only one who passed the test I didn't even tell him I was giving." Meeting Nana Osi was surreal. The man who opened the door of the East Legon compound was elderly but sharp-eyed, dressed in expensive traditional cloth, but wearing it casually, like someone comfortable in his own skin. He looked at Kwame for a long moment, then smiled. "So you're the carpenter who stole my daughter's heart." "Sir, Kwame began, but Nana Osi waved him off. Come in, let's talk." Over the next hours, over drinks and dinner in a dining room larger than Kwame's entire apartment, Nana Osi talked. He talked about business and family and the burden of wealth. He talked about watching his daughter leave, about respecting her choice even as it worried him. And he talked about Kwame. "I had you investigated," Nana Osi said bluntly. "Don't look so shocked. Of course I did. My daughter was living in a modest flat and dating a carpenter, and I needed to know you weren't dangerous. What I found was interesting." He leaned back in his chair. "I found a man who paid his apprentices fairly, who turned down a lucrative contract because the client wanted him to use substandard materials, who lent money to his neighbors and never pressed them for repayment, who, by all accounts, was honest and hard-working and kind." Nana Ose fixed Kwame with a penetrating stare. "I also found a man whose family kept telling him to marry rich, to be practical, to think of his future. And instead, you married my daughter when you thought she had nothing. Do you understand what that told me?" Kwame shook his head mutely. "It told me that my daughter finally found someone who valued her correctly, not for what she could provide, but for who she is." The older man's eyes grew bright. "That's all a father wants, really. To know his child is loved for the right reasons." He stood and walked to a window overlooking the compound. "I'm going to be honest with you, Kwame. I could help your business tremendously. I have contracts, connections, resources. I could make you wealthy beyond what your current trajectory will ever achieve." Kwame's chest tightened, but he said nothing. "But," Nana Osi continued, turning back, "I'm not going to do that. Not yet, anyway. Because I think you need to build your business your own way, with your own hands, just like you've been doing. That's what my daughter fell in love with. Your integrity, your independence, your strength. I won't undermine that by making things easy for you." He returned to his seat, and looked at both of them. However, should you ever want to expand legitimately, should you ever want advice or perhaps an introduction to certain suppliers who could give you fair prices, that I can provide. As a father-in-law, not as a benefactor. There's a difference. Kwame felt something in his chest relax. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Just love my daughter, Nana Osi said simply. Keep choosing her the way you've been choosing her. That's all I ask. The next Sunday, Kwame invited his family for lunch at his apartment. His mother, his aunt, his cousin Emmanuel, all of them crowded into the small space, curious about why he'd called them together. Amma served them herself, bringing out dishes she and Kwame had prepared together. And then, when everyone was settled, Kwame stood. I wanted you all here because I have something to tell you. For years, you've been telling me I made a mistake, that I should have married someone with wealth and connections, someone whose family could help me advance. He could see them shifting uncomfortably, but he continued. You were right. I should have married someone like that. And I did. Confusion rippled through the room. Kwame reached out and took Amma's hand, pulling her to stand beside him. My wife, he said clearly, is Amma Ose, daughter of Nana Ose of Ose Enterprises. The silence was profound. Manuel's mouth literally fell open. His mother gasped. His aunt looked like she might faint. But, his mother finally stammered, but she works as an accountant. She dresses so simply. I thought she wanted to be loved for herself, Kwame said, not for her father's name or wealth. So she built her own life, separate from all that. And I loved her without knowing any of it, which means, he squeezed Amma's hand. I loved her for exactly the right reasons. He looked around at his family, seeing the shock and dawning realization on their faces. So, yes, I married someone with wealth and connections. I just didn't know it, which makes it even better. It means every choice I made was genuine. Every time I defended her to you, every time I chose her over your advice, I did it purely out of love. Emmanuel was the first to recover, a slow smile spreading across his face. Brother, you are either the luckiest man in Ghana or the smartest. I can't decide which. Neither, Kwame said firmly. I'm just a man who knew a treasure when he saw one, even when it was disguised as something ordinary. His mother stood and approached Amma, taking her hands. My daughter, I am sorry. I judged you unfairly. I thought. She trailed off, shaking her head. It doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is that you have a good heart, and you love my son, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Amma hugged her mother-in-law, and Kwame saw tears on both their faces. Years later, many years later, Kwame would sit in the expanded workshop of what had become Kwame and Sons Carpentry, teaching his own children the craft he loved. The business had grown substantially, aided by strategic advice from his father-in-law, but built primarily through Kwame's own skill and reputation. And sometimes, when Amma visited the workshop and ran her hands along the pieces he was building, he would stop and watch her and remember. He would remember the simple woman who walked past his shop every morning. He would remember choosing her over everyone's advice. He would remember the terror and relief on her face when she finally told him the truth. Most of all, he would remember that he had loved her when he thought she had nothing to give him but herself, and how that had turned out to be everything worth having. What are you smiling about? Amma would ask, catching him watching her. And Kwame would pull her close and whisper, just remembering how I married up by marrying you. You didn't marry up, she would protest. We married equal. No, Kwame would say, kissing her forehead. I married far better than I deserved. I just didn't know how much better until later. And I'm grateful every day that I loved you before I knew. Because it means I loved you for exactly the right reasons. And that, my children, is why I tell you this. True wealth is not measured in bank accounts or family compounds. True wealth is found in being loved for who you are, not what you can provide. Kwame was rich long before he knew his wife's background because he had something money cannot buy, a partner who chose him, and whom he chose for all the right reasons. Remember this story when people tell you to be practical in love, to think of advantages and connections. By all means, be wise. But never forget that the greatest treasure is finding someone who sees you truly, and choosing to see them truly in return. May you all be so fortunate.